Hey, I'm Kieran, and this is ShelleyDuvallScream. So I just got home from seeing It Follows, and I kind of wanted to get some of my ideas out before I lost it being fresh in my head. I'm still not entirely sure how I felt about it. I think I liked it. I'm pretty sure I liked it. There were some things I didn't like about it, but overall, I'd say I enjoyed it. I feel like this is a movie you really kind of have to think about. While it does have excellent suspense and some good jump out scares, it's a little bit more cerebral than all that. So for those of you who don't know, the movie is about a girl, Jamie, who she's seeing this guy and they have sex for the first time. Then he chloroforms her, ties her up to a wheelchair, and tells her that something is going to follow her. That it's been following him, and that the only way to get rid of it is to pass it on to someone else. You don't really know what that thing is, but you see it then as a naked woman walking towards them. So the idea is that wherever you are, wherever you go, it's coming for you. It's always walking, so sometimes it takes a while, but it's always going to be there. I first became interested in seeing this movie when a blogger I follow, Arabelle Sicardi, she's a fashion and lifestyle blogger, I guess, wrote about it on her Tumblr, saying that it was an excellent story of basically what it's like to survive sexual assault. The following in that is kind of a metaphor for the fact that you can never get away from what happened to you. It kind of takes from movies like The Last House on the Left, and the whole idea of rape revenge as a genre in the 80s, though this isn't that at all. It deals with sexual trauma in a really interesting way. Basically that trauma personified. I think going into the movie with that perspective definitely colored it a little bit for me. Having that backstory in my head made me kind of watch it in a certain way and look for certain things. And I think she was definitely right. I think that it's a very effective movie about the overbearing weight of trauma. One of the things I really liked about the movie was the realness of the characters and their relationships. I think that they did a really excellent job of building the characters and giving us moments of levity where we got to know them and we got to understand their relationships, especially Jamie and Paul, who is the close friend. I also really like the relationship between Jamie and her sister, though I think it probably could have been built a little bit more. Having those moments of levity broke up the suspense in this movie because a lot of it is very suspenseful. You're kind of waiting for that moment when something's going to jump out, when something's going to scare you. There were definitely jump scares in this movie. I jumped and possibly screamed, maybe, a couple of times, because I'm easy to scare like that, but they were effective jump scares. It wasn't just a scare to scare you. They built on the story, they got you when you least expected it, and when you had those moments of calm. Perfect example is the first night after it happens when Paul's staying over, and she's sitting on the couch talking to him, and all of a sudden the window in the kitchen breaks. You have this great moment where you're relieved, and I turned to my friend and I said, I'm just kidding, I want this to be a rom-com about them, like, I don't want it to be horror anymore, they're so cute. But it snaps you right back into it. Something that added a whole lot to the suspense of the movie was the soundtrack, which I feel like definitely called back on movies like Halloween, and the great movie soundtracks of the 80s that really built that terror and that suspension. And as soon as you start to hear suspension, the mood of the movie was done really well too. The cinematography, the lighting, everything like that, even the setting. They're in Detroit, or the suburbs of Detroit, and it's not your typical suburban setting. It's not Haddonfield from weird because Haddonfield's real to me. Anyway, it's not Haddonfield from Halloween. It's not expensive houses and fancy clothes or whatever. It's dingy. It's beat up. Overall, I just think that the atmosphere was built really well. You were scared in the right places, and everything around you really added to that. There's nothing I hate more than, like, distracting cinematography or costuming or music especially, and everything just was part of it. Structure-wise, it felt a little long. I kept waiting for a resolution that honestly never really came. You want that big final showdown, and you had it, but it wasn't the end. Not that there was much after the final showdown, it just felt... it wasn't satisfying. That's the one big downfall of this movie, was that final, I'm going to say final showdown again, that last battle where they're confronting this thing head on. I wanted it to be more. I wanted it to be grander, and I wanted it to go one way or the other. The one friend character, the girl with the glasses, I don't remember her name, she's there to kind of set the mood for a lot of things, and she did feel like a throwaway, but I understand why they needed her. Could have been the sister, I feel like, but whatever. She's reading Dostoevsky the entire time, The Idiot, I believe, and she reads aloud from it a couple of times. The idea of literature is kind of important in this movie, though not extremely. Basically, everything that's read aloud in the movie is relevant to what you're watching, and I feel like I definitely need a rewatch to understand that a little bit more and to really listen to those things closely. It's not easy to do in the theater and catch every word, especially when you're kind of focusing on Jamie and what's happening to her. The most important thing that's read, though, is the last thing that this bespectacled friend reads from Dostoevsky, and it's about how when they're suffering, there's wounds, and that pain comes from those wounds, but it's also coming from the idea as you're dying that you're aware that in only a matter of time you will no longer be a person. This brings me to the end of the movie. In the moment it wasn't satisfying, but after a second of talking to my friend about it and kind of revisiting that quote and revisiting the ideas of Lazarus, the idea is that you postpone death in order to live, but you can only postpone it. And that's a certain level of acceptance that you need. And that really ties back into this whole idea of sexual assault survival, is that it's not something you can ever get rid of. It's something that you'll live with your entire life. And I think that that's an interesting thing, because it's not addressed in a lot of horror movies where people go through extremely traumatic things, and you're like, wow, that person's going to be really screwed up for the rest of their life. But it just ends where it does, no one ever addresses that fact. And I do kind of like that they did in this, that they addressed the fact that, like, regardless of the fact that she's given it away to someone else or passed it on, whether or not the thing follows her for the rest of her life, she will never forget the time that it did. That's something that... Alright, so the guy that she gets it from, Hugh, I think his name is actually Jeff. They visit him, they go to find him, and he tells her that he still sees it, even though he's given it to her. And she sees it after she gives it away as well. And I wonder if all the people who have ever had it, if the girl who passed it to Jeff/Hugh still sees it, and if the person who gave it to her still sees it, and if it's something that ever actually goes away. And I guess passing it on is just giving it a different victim, but you can always see it if it's there. I really, really like the concept of this movie, and I really like a lot of the things about it. I'm not going to say it was perfect, because it wasn't. There were moments where it dragged on, and you weren't really sure where it was going, and even though the suspense was great and the scares were good, you were wondering why they were still happening, and why we weren't moving on. All that said, I think it was an extremely successful movie for what it wanted to do. They could have cut out a couple of scenes, but I really enjoyed it, and I think that it did what it wanted to do. Does it appeal to a mass audience? I don't think so. As soon as the movie ended, the guy walked out immediately and was like, I hated that. which I thought was kind of funny, especially because knowing what I knew about it going into it, as soon as those guys walked into the theater, it was just us at first. As soon as those guys walked into the theater, I was like, they're not going to get this. I think it's something that you have to honestly think critically about, and it's not something that's frequently addressed in film right now, especially mainstream film. Which is interesting, especially one of the trailers we saw was for the movie Unfriended, which is coming out, and it's about a girl who, basically, I'm pretty sure a video of her being raped was posted to YouTube, and then, like, 3 days later she kills herself, but then her ghost attacks the people who posted it. But it's not a movie about her, it's not a movie about what happened to her, it's a movie about getting revenge. And the idea of dealing with trauma, of living through trauma and experiencing it as a survivor, isn't something a lot of people probably ever think about. This movie has a lot to say, and that's one of the reasons I like it so much. Like I said, it wasn't perfect. The execution was pretty darn good. But the message is really what's most important here, and I think it was portrayed extremely well. If what I'm reading into it is what they set out to do, they did an excellent job. And even if I'm not reading into it what they meant, I'm glad that I went into it with that context, and I think it adds a lot to the movie, because going into it not really understanding what you're watching, it probably was a lot less satisfying. That said, the ending, like I said, wasn't super satisfying at first, but thinking about it for a moment, I got it. They could have driven it home a little bit harder. Overall, I do think you should see it. I mean, I keep saying that it was good, so obviously I think that, and I think you should watch it critically and watch it with surviving and trauma in mind, because it colors the film in a way that really makes it work. I did watch a bunch of other movies this week. Probably not going to talk about all of them, but I am scrounging the depths of Netflix trying to find things that are actually really good. Definitely going to be making a review about the movie Pontypool, which if you haven't seen it, watch it. It's on Netflix Instant. It's fantastic. Borrow your friend's Netflix, ask your dad to buy it for a month. Whatever you have to do, see the movie. It's really good. I'm also going to be watching a bunch more movies whenever I have free time. Really trying to get back into the habit of it. Really trying to find some things that I love. And I'll be doing more reviews soon, so keep an eye out for them. And hope you liked what I had to say on this one.